Hello and welcome to another episode of the Whip 12 podcast. I'm your host for today, Diomedes, and today I'm joined by our very own inimitable BlessedBe and the excellent PandaBeastMode. Welcome, both of you. Thanks for coming on.
Hey.
Thanks, great to be here.
Now, you may be wondering, dear listener, what it is that we're going to talk about today. Well, it's a bit of a surprise and a bit of a treat, I would say, because we are talking about playtesting, specifically playtesting Infinity, of course. And our two guests today are playtesters. So, what we want to talk about is a lot of things. We actually canvassed the fandom, the players that we know online, for questions that they would like to know about, answers to the deep and meaningful things that happen in playtesting, and we've combed through them and made some cuts, made some edits. We've got some things we can talk about and some things we cannot talk about, but we'll get into that in a moment. I think, but what would be great is to start by asking both of you, where are you up to with your Infinity, just general hobby stuff? I think both of you, obviously, Blessed, you are a host yourself, and Panda, you've been on before. So tell us where you're at with your Infinity journey, for lack of a better word.
Panda, do you want to go first, and then I'll chime in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been really excited to play N5 since its launch. I haven't had time to play as much as I wanted, so I've only played a few tournaments so far in 5, but I really enjoyed playing, and I hope to get to play more in the future.
Yeah, I'm in a similar position. I've actually played a reasonable amount of N5, but not in tournaments at the moment. Though obviously I've been following all of the big events and stuff for a while. I took a little bit of a step back at the beginning of N5, but as I'm sure lots of people are aware before then, I played Infinity since like the start of N3, so I've got years on this, and just took a little step back a couple of months ago. At the moment, I mean, I would say a lot of our time, Panda and I, is probably taken up with playtesting. We've been very busy recently. A lot of the games that we've played together have been testing new stuff, so it is important to highlight that that's something that takes up a lot of time for us at the moment.
Yeah, I guess probably half of my games in the past month have been testing games with BlessedBe.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get onto that then. Let's start with some basics. How do you become a tester? From the outside looking in, it seems like, well, it's an incredibly opaque process for me at least. Were you approached by CB? Did you approach them? How does it work?
This is actually a really funny question because I can't really remember.
Good
Panda,
start.
did I invite you to test with me, or
Yes,
what happened?
yes,
Yeah.
you invited me to join you in testing. So
Yeah.
I don't know, I have no idea what happened before that or how you get invited. But you told me to, I think, send an email to CB or something like that.
Yeah. I've obviously been involved with CB for a long time because I've run satellite events and I've done a lot of things. And throughout sort of N4, I worked on some rules stuff. So I worked with Differation or Differation, if anyone remembers them. They ended up doing a lot of FAQ stuff, and I helped with like FAQs and things basically. And through that, I had a little bit of direct contact with CB themselves. And then at the beginning of the sort of development of N5, I was approached by CB to play test. But it just took a long time and a lot of admin for it to all come together, and I didn't actually start doing it until N5 started, like proper. And when we play test, we have partners that we play test with, people that we play our games against, because obviously we can't just go and play loads of games against random people because it's confidential material. So I invited Panda to be my testing partner. And yeah, that's kind of it really. That's how it worked. So I guess it wasn't that random. I've been doing like stuff for CB for a little while, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think now before we jump into the sort of meat of it, maybe now is a good moment to talk about what we can talk about. Obviously, maybe not obviously, but I'm aware, and I think probably other people are as well, that when you do a job like this, you sign a non-disclosure agreement with Corvus Belli, and there are some things you can talk about and some things you cannot talk about. So, if you wouldn't mind, both of you can outline the rough contours of where this conversation is going to go from here on
Mm.
out.
Panda, do you want to answer this, or shall I? Or I don't
Uh,
really mind.
yeah, so basically, due to the NDA, we are not allowed to talk about any material that CB sends us for testing. So that might include profiles or new rules or basically any kind of material that CB is thinking about introducing into the game. But we can talk about the testing process itself.
Yeah. So I think in terms of like my understanding, we can't talk about any of the business stuff at CB. That makes sense. Like obviously their internal business is confidential, and we can't talk about any unreleased stuff, whether that's, whether it be missions or profiles or whatever, like none of that stuff we can talk about. I think I can't quite remember what the wording is, but I'm aware that obviously once something is in the public domain, it's not covered by the NDA anymore. That makes sense, right? Because we've all seen it at that point.
Yeah, although I'm a bit unsure about the like previous, for example, versions of profiles that we have seen that are not the official release profile. So
Yeah.
it might
So,
be best not to talk about those either.
what was that exactly, Panda? Just so I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so usually during the testing process, we are seeing, or we might see several versions of profile, for
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
and we can of course talk about the released profile, the final version of it, but it's probably best not to talk about the unreleased, unfinished versions of a profile.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we could probably say, like very vague statements about stuff, but I wouldn't be happy to discuss the specifics of things that weren't released, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, like you could say a profile did change during testing, but not necessarily how it changed,
Yeah,
perhaps.
I'd be happy to say we worked on something, but I'm not going to tell you what it looked like and all of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. So, listeners out there, some of you may wish to turn off now without getting all of the juicy details, but you have to hopefully understand that this is an ongoing process that these two are involved in, and Corvus Belli has to protect those beautiful minis and profiles that you all love and keep them fresh for you for later use. So hopefully you all appreciate that. Um, so, with all that said, let's go through a couple more, shall we say, basic questions, if we can answer those. Um, First of all, why did you start playtesting? What was your personal motivation for doing it?
Well, for me, I think because I'd been involved with some CB activity in the past, I was really keen to take on more. I'd love Infinity. I've had moments where I'm very frustrated with Infinity. I've had moments when I might be frustrated with CB and things, but generally, like throughout the last sort of 10 years or so, I've really enjoyed this game and I've loved this game and I've loved being involved in organizing, big things for this game like satellites and stuff. So I was really keen to start playtesting. Um, and I think one of the factors that really decided it for me was the fact that I am quite active, in a variety of like online um, online, let's say, sort of locations for Infinity, like on the Reddit and on some of the Facebook groups and on lots of the Discords. So I have a really good sense of what people are saying about the game. Sometimes I agree and sometimes I don't. But when I was invited to playtest, I thought it would be a really good opportunity for me to go to CB with like the opinions of or the consensus of other people that I've seen. So that's something that I really wanted to do. Like, I guess, sort of do it democratically in a way, in the sense of not just being like self-centered, but also thinking about what everyone is saying about
You want
the
to
game.
be the voice of the people, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like in a way, yeah. And I can't give anything away. Like I can't tell people what we're working on, obviously. But I do message people sometimes and say like, hey, how do you feel about your faction? Like, what do you think's good about it? What do you think's bad about it? And they'll have a think about it and go from there. So I can't give things away, but I can chat to people and get a sense of what's going on.
Okay. And Panda?
Yeah, I haven't been involved with CB before, except running a couple of satellite tournaments. And I'm not as active online as Blessed is. Uh, but I've spent a lot of time going through the Army app, looking at different profiles, thinking how they could be better or how some profiles or fractions could be nerfed to like make the game more balanced. So when this opportunity came up, I was really eager to take it because I really enjoy this kind of testing stuff.
Yeah, it must be fascinating. It's not something I ever imagined that I would come close to. I mean, I'm talking to you two now, but as soon as we talked about doing this interview, I was like, oh wow, playtesting, that would be a really cool and interesting thing to do in this game. Um, okay, well, one final basic question we had, and you feel free to answer or not answer this, but do you get compensated in any way for your work from CB?
I'm not sure we can directly answer this question, but my opinion, I can give my personal perspective. And my perspective is that, like, whether I do or don't, it doesn't matter. I do it because I want to do it, not, if I were to be paid, that wouldn't actually be relevant to me.
Do you have anything to say about that, Panda? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy with last answer.
Okay. Cool. Good. Good. Jolly good. Then we'll move on to a little bit more about how this whole thing works. I think maybe the best way to start this would be for you to just give us an outline about what it is like to be a tester. What do you do, and what is the process? And then we can maybe from that, some of you sent in questions might hear answers in those descriptions, and if not, we'll then try and tease out maybe some more details as much as I am able to do. So, Blessed, if you want to kick us off, maybe take us through a regular day of testing, as it were.
Yeah. A regular day of testing. Okay, so I'll probably go through a regular week of testing because I'm not doing it like literally every day. But so Panda and I get sent things to work on. So things that CB are looking at. These are usually projects, like big projects. So, for example, I'd be happy to say, Next Wave is coming up. People know that Next Wave is coming up. That's been announced. So that's an example of a project that we'll look at. And what happens is the playtesting team will send us an Excel spreadsheet. I think Gutier confirmed this at one of the conventions recently. So what we get is Excel spreadsheets. And the Excel spreadsheets just have lots of testing material on. So we see lots of different units, we see the profiles for things, and we get new rules as well. So we get sort of Google Docs with new rules and stuff on. And in the email, Gutier or other members of the testing team will say to us, like, hey, we're thinking about this, ask us a couple of questions. What do you think about X or Y? Could you play some games focusing on this specific thing or that specific thing? And then they'll ask us to get back to us with some kind of deadline. And the deadline changes, like depending on how big the project is, essentially.
Okay.
So that's kind of an average week.
Is that's roughly the same for you, Panda?
Yeah, I could also add that, like BlessedBe mentioned earlier, every tester has a testing pair, um, and they are testing and discussing things together, and of course playing testing games. Usually, uh, we have time to play maybe one, maximum two testing games for every report that we make. And usually, we make maybe a couple of reports per month.
So just to clarify a little bit more, on average, we'll do like a report a week, and in that time, that'll be a game or two, something like that. But then, obviously, we're not just sending like one report a week and then calling it done. This could go on for multiple weeks. So depending on how big the project is, it could be quite short, just a couple of games, or it could be months and months and lots of work.
Okay. Okay. So it's just you two working together as a pair. Do you have any? Is there a playtesters Discord? Do you talk only to each other and to CB, or is there a wider sort of community of testers?
Yes, there is a playtester Discord that has other testers and their testing partners. Uh, but that Discord is only for kind of like general stuff. But we are not allowed to talk about the profiles and our thoughts about those profiles with other testers. And that's because CB wants to make sure that uh, our opinions that we have represent our own thoughts and that they get a diverse set of different opinions and thoughts about the profiles.
Yeah, so it's quite a sensible thing when we're not supposed to go into the Discord and start sort of trying to sway other people or give strong opinions about stuff, because obviously for CB that would be really problematic, right? Because they want a diverse range of opinions and they want people's own opinions. So in order to avoid it becoming like a social exercise, we're not supposed to like chat with the other testers, basically.
Yeah, I suppose you sort of want the opposite of what happens in any given Discord or Reddit or whatever, where it's like someone expresses a strong opinion and then like loads of people go, "Yeah, that sounds right. Oh, okay, this is now the consensus."
Yeah,
Without any notion of what that's based on. It's like, "Oh, I
exactly.
played all the games and I think this. Okay, good." And now
Yeah.
everyone thinks that. Yeah.
So that would be really unhealthy for testing. So CB like obviously encourage us to not do that. But I would say even within our pair, Panda and I, like we do disagree with things. Had a little discussion with Panda this morning about some units, and we disagreed on a couple of things. And I don't think that's a problem. I think that's quite healthy, actually. So yeah, I think it's important that we don't go and try and sway each other.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think we maybe agree on maybe 75% of the stuff and disagree on the rest, which I think is
Mm.
pretty good amount or good distribution.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And also like that, it's also like good for CB if there are like multiple testers that are saying the same thing without talking to each other. That's a pretty strong indication that there is something real behind that thought.
Yeah, yeah. It adds to the authenticity because they know that this isn't just because one person has said something. This is coming independently from lots of sources, and that's much more important.
Sure. Does that then leads me to perhaps a follow-up question on that, which is like now that you are testers and you have been for a notable period of time, do you find yourself in a sense, because you want to preserve your own unique opinion, do you find yourselves perhaps, I know obviously, Panda, you're not as present online and online forums as Blessed is, but do you find yourselves steering away from those conversations that are like, oh, such and such a profile needs X, Y, and Z because I decided that is so, and everyone gets into a long conversation about, well, this profile needs this and this and this. Is that not? Is that? Do you feel that maybe would affect your kind of feeling on the game and the feeling on what profile should and shouldn't do, or is that not a consideration?
That's a really good question. Uh, I still follow and participate in those discussions, but I've noticed that I have a more detached approach to those. Now, I still voice my opinions in those kind of discussions and ask for other people's opinions, and also that's like good feedback from me about things that I should maybe focus on. when testing.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with Panda. I think I still get involved in those discussions. I actually think they're really important. And I am happy to give my opinions. I've been very vocal about things as a person, but obviously I can't comment as a tester, right? So I can comment as someone that plays Infinity. However, what I will say is that whilst I pay maybe more attention to the discussion, what I don't necessarily pay as much attention to is specific um specific like rules changes or suggestions like that. So I'll just give the example of the big bad from N4 when everyone was talking about it. So let's take GML. Everyone all the time was talking about guided all the time. I'm interested in those discussions because I want to know what people are saying, but I'm less interested in the specific fixes that people would come up with because I don't want to start sort of closing my horizons and just thinking along one set path.
Sure. Yeah, you don't want to sort of inadvertently internalize somebody else's opinion about this
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
But it is
exactly.
useful to know that
Oh,
a number of people are talking about it and have opinions
exactly,
one way or another. That
exactly.
it's a sort of hot topic, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, the other thing that's really important I want to say is I have my mind changed reasonably often about stuff. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about how in N5, I didn't think any sectorial of Ariadne was doing very well. And then actually, it came to my attention that TAC was maybe doing a little bit better than I thought they were doing. And so my mind was changed. And so I think that is actually really important to engage with because I would feel personally, if I was playtesting for CB and I wasn't fully informed of what was going on, I don't think I would be doing as good of a job. I'm not necessarily saying I am doing a good job. I'm not trying to be big headed, but I'm just saying I want to do
As
the best
good
job I can.
yeah, as good a job as you can do. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I will also add that if there are some profiles or rules that I'm testing at the moment, then I'm much less likely to join those discussions about those profiles because there's no point like saying what I think should be done to a profile
Mhm.
if I'm like testing that profile. I mean,
Yeah.
I can just give my feedback straight to CB and not in some online discussions.
Yeah.
You don't need to complain about it to some random person. You
Yeah,
can just
exactly.
tell the people who matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair play.
The other thing that I do often say to people in discussions, like if people are complaining about X unit or Y unit and they know that I'm a playtester, I will say, I have noted this discussion. I can't tell you what might happen. That would break my NDA, but I'm just letting you know, like I've seen this, I know that there's a problem here and I'll have a think about it. So I can like give an opinion as a player and just say, I've seen this discussion. And that's it, really. I'm not gonna necessarily tell them what I'm sending to CB. I'm not going to tell them what CB said. I'm not going to tell them anything that I'm playtesting, but I'll just let people know that I am looking and I am paying attention.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Moving on. Here's an interesting question. How directed is your playtesting? Do you obviously there's an ongoing project, they're asking you to work on it. Do they say like we'd like you to test this specific thing, or is it like take all of these rules and test them as you will and let us know what you think?
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's both directed and undirected. So, like Blessed mentioned before, CB is sending us an email and materials and asking us to test those materials and focus on specific things. And we will do that in our testing and write that in our reports. But we're also allowed to just throw some random ideas. For example, I often like to suggest to CB that these profiles might need revision and
Mm-hmm.
maybe throw some ideas how they could be revised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. The answer is both. So it's directed in the sense that obviously we all know CB has big projects, and when those big projects are active, when they're sort of being planned, obviously it's our job to spend a lot of time looking at them. But again, if a profile comes into my awareness that maybe I think, oh, that could do with a look at, I will put that in my report as well. But I think you have to be cognizant of how much time and energy these processes work. So most people, I think most people struggle to get a game in of Infinity a week. Some people play one game a week. It's rare to speak to people that play more than that. Panda and I, we really need to be getting games in. We probably do about one a week. Occasionally more, not really less. And when you're working on a big project, obviously because it's hard to get loads and loads and loads of games of Infinity in, we really need to spend a lot of time and put a lot of attention into that one project because we just do not have time to test everything. So if CB said, please can you look at this thing? Well, the one or two games I get in that week are going to be looking at that thing. And then I can't then go and deal with like the random gripe I saw online last week because I don't have time and I can't do it.
Yeah, fair enough. That leads me to another question. Then we've talked about you getting spreadsheets of the profiles and whatnot. When you're playtesting, are you sort of, do you use those spreadsheets and add notes to them, or are you how are you sort of tallying and quantifying the performance of a given rule or profile? Is it very detailed, or are we talking more like, I think this? Is it more of a, are you writing an essay, or are you filling in a form? Is maybe a way to think about it.
Yeah, I would say it's somewhere between. I'm definitely not writing an essay about the profile, but also it's not filling in a form. So basically, I tell my opinion. I might give some suggestions how to change a profile, for example, and give my arguments why that would be a good idea, in my opinion.
How much would you how much do you write on in any given report then? Are we talking a few paragraphs, or are we talking pages? What's the and if you're focusing on one specific area, do you just write less on that one area, or do you expand it out?
It's pages. It's very extensive. There were a couple of weeks where Panda and I sent in over 10 pages every week for a few weeks. They're quite a lot of work. And Panda, you
I
agree?
think my longest report was like 17 pages of text.
Yeah.
With maybe
Wow.
maybe like one picture in there of an like, army list that I used. But
Yeah.
also like some reports have been shorter. Like I think the shortest report that I've sent was maybe like 3 or 4 pages.
Yeah. It's a couple of pages.
Yeah. So you're writing hundreds, at least hundreds of words.
Oh, yeah, thousands. Yeah.
Thousands of words.
Yeah.
Per report.
Yeah, and bear in mind, like, we are often asked to do this every week. This is not an easy thing to do. So in terms of like thinking about performance and our thoughts and stuff, we play our games and we have a think, but in my line of work, we sometimes have what's called, like, I guess, sort of like your professional instinct, which is this idea where like you've been doing something for so long, like you kind of get a vibe, and that vibe is usually true. Like you do question yourself, but it's usually true because you've just been doing something for decades. I've been playing Infinity for about a decade. And God, that sounds really long when I say it like that, actually. And so when I see a profile on an Excel spreadsheet, I have a reasonably good sense of like what I can expect for the points cost and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that intuition is usually correct, maybe 80% of the time or so. But also we've had occasions when we are thinking something about a profile and then we actually test it in a game and see that we've been like totally wrong. Or maybe, for example, maybe the profile might look strong or bad, but in a specific context, it's actually something else. And like when you're like putting together a list of various profiles in a specific faction that has some limitations and strengths, it becomes quite more complex. But then again, like we've been playing Infinity for years, so we know the factions pretty well. We know how different units work in those factions and so on.
But Panda's right. It's a delicate job because despite everything that we've just said about our intuition and stuff, as you also alluded to, we do get surprised sometimes, and sometimes there are things that dramatically affect performance that we might miss. Like one single stat that we didn't realize was like different to what we thought it was, and that dramatically changes the performance of a unit. Or, for example, it actually turns out that like the fire team options are different to what we thought, and that can dramatically change a profile as well. So you've got to be very careful in the feedback you give and quite considered.
Hmm. Oh, yeah, that sounds about right. If you got, I mean, it's such a complex game, right? There's so many moving parts in any single list, never
Yeah,
mind in a whole
right.
faction.
Yeah.
So that makes sense, and it's good to hear as well that you're taking it seriously. Of course, I mean you've come on here to talk about it, so you would hope that you are doing, but also that it's not just a seriousness. It's like a care, I suppose, a care for what it's about and how it works and how things interact, which is it's easy. It's something we sort of lay players do, right? Is that you look at a profile and you see some list of skills or stats and you go, oh my god, this thing is so broken. I mean, that happened recently with like the new wave, next wave stuff, where it was like the basic line troopers. They've all got templates and they've got combat instinct. There's this hacker and blah blah blah. And I remember reading people being like, "This is mad," which it does sort of seem like that on the surface, but of course, your job is to look past that surface thing of like, okay, this looks good in various different ways, and think, well, okay, but where does it sit in that context of the rest of the faction and how it plays against other factions and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just about individual units, it's about the faction as a whole. And so many times Panda and I have tested something, we've said superficially, this thing is far too good or not good enough, or some comment like that. But actually, within the faction, it either serves an important role or it's really hard to fit into a list, just as some examples.
And I think that's a pretty common reaction online that when something new gets released, people are uh, judging that it's either broken or it's totally useless. Because, like, of course, people who have those opinions are going to voice them, and those who think that it's only okay or quite good are less likely to talk about it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's something that as a as a self-confessed kind of like hipster, I like bad factions when I play. It's so often I get that sense, you're sort of trying to have a conversation with someone, and it just sort of gets shut down a little bit because of that superficial reading of like, well, this doesn't work for X, Y, and Z reasons, and I've made up my mind already, and you know, you're an idiot for liking this thing. As an extreme example, but those kinds of things do happen, and it's nice to hear, at least from my personal perspective, that you're thinking a little bit further than that, and that it is necessary to do so in order to do a good job.
Yeah, it's just, I think being a playtester or being a good playtester um, is an exercise in patience. um, and it's also an exercise in trying to be as reasonable as possible, I would say. So just, trying to think quite carefully and not come to snap judgments, and, try and play things as much as you can before you declare something like completely broken or unplayable or whatever.
And following on from that, so when you are doing this testing and you're looking at these things, of course, you two are both competitive players. You think competitively in regards to the game. But of course, the game, at least my perception is that Corvus Belli would like the game, if it doesn't already, to serve a sort of wider audience of people who maybe don't think so competitively. So do you consider that in your considerations, as it were? Do you think about the sort of fun factor, or is it purely just like, if we can make this sort of mechanically coherent and balanced, then the fun will take care of itself?
Yeah, I focus on both, although I'm probably a bit more competitive oriented in my approach. But I still consider the fun factor. Uh, Also, like, besides balance, like, one thing about what makes game balance important is that if the game is unbalanced, then in many bigger and more competitive tournaments, the best players will start to play those best factions, and that will make it even like poorer experience for those less experienced players who are playing just factions that they enjoy because they like the minis or so on. So I think like the game is more fun generally if it's balanced. But when thinking about profiles, for example, I do also think about the fun factor. Like my basic philosophy for looking at profiles is that I want every profile to have a purpose in a list. So some kind of reason why I would take this profile or this unit in my list. And if I cannot find out any reason why I would ever include this unit in my list for any kind of mission or any situation, then I think that unit probably should be uh, adjusted a bit. But also, I don't want the game to be perfectly balanced, but because that could also be boring if things are getting too similar. And also, it's like cool to have like different kind of interesting mechanics and different kind of purposes for profiles. So it doesn't. So when I talk about purpose, it doesn't mean that a profile should be that all profile should be great, but that they have some sort of niche that they can fill.
Yeah, I think maybe Panda and I are slightly different. Hang on, I'll just put this out there, Panda, and you can disagree with me. I don't necessarily personally look for every profile to be very good, but I do look for every individual unit to have at least one profile that's compelling. Panda, do you differ in thinking that every single profile should be compelling, or just like one or two per unit?
Well, I think that would be kind of the perfect situation if every profile of every unit uh, would be useful in some sense. But of course, that's really difficult to achieve when Infinity has hundreds of units that have various different profiles. So I usually look at the unit first and hope to find at least one useful profile there. And when that is achieved, then I can take a deeper look at the unit and see how maybe other profiles could be made more playable as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. Yeah.
And it's the same thing if some profile or some unit seems too strong, uh, but then it's just like a backward process of how how to make it less overpowered.
Yeah, less obnoxious. Um, but I think I agree with Panda. So I play competitively. I'm not the best competitive player. I'm okay. I'm quite good, but not amazing. But I do also think that if you solve a lot of the balance issues in the game, I think it does become a more fun game for everyone because if you're a more casual player, you want to select the stuff that's cool. And if the stuff that's cool also works and is reasonably well balanced, then you're going to have a fun time regardless. That's, one of my beliefs about game design. And the other thing, as Panda said, is I think every single unit should be interesting. I don't necessarily think that every single unit should be really competitive, but I think every unit should do something. There should be a reason that you can come up with for running every unit. And this is why I'm a big fan of the brand new line infantry that we're seeing. If you remember, like the new Keisotsu from JSA, they've got, I think, a profile that's BS12 instead of BS11 and has like a marksman rifle or something. Or is it a Thunderbolt? I think it's a Thunderbolt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of that kind of approach. Like, I think every single unit should have something it does that's kind of cool. And when the Harbingers were previewed, I noticed that like some of the Harbinger profiles, had some interesting like mechanics, and I thought like for me that's a good thing because there's a reason to take this unit. I like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. Another good example is that uh, when N5 was launched, many profiles that were not played much in N4 got disco ballers. So that didn't make the units that much better, but it gave them some extra utility. that can be really important in a list.
Yeah. We do also, I mean, we do look out for fun as well. We all have our pet peeves. I've gone on record many times saying I'm not a big fan of pictures. So when I see a picture, I do get enraged. Everyone knows this. So there are like little things that I think we all as people pay attention to and just think like, is this going to be fun to play against as well? And I'm not commenting there and like giving anything away from a tester perspective. I'm just saying as a person, there's some stuff in the game that I like and there's some stuff in the game that I don't like.
Yeah, I agree.
That's interesting. That leads into this a question that we have about when you're testing a game, do you consider a negative play experiences? To which someone is referencing specifically guided missile launch sort of tactics. There's an interesting, perhaps, sort of confluence there of obviously you're trying to make sure that every profile has a niche, but one of those niches could be zero risk kind of killer thing niche, which some factions do well, some do less well, some don't do at all. But that tactic specifically in this instance, a lot of people think it's just an unpleasant thing to experience and either, are sworn off it or hate seeing it. And so when you're considering, okay, we have this profile we have to test, we have this, we've discovered perhaps, and maybe this is also another interesting question, if you discover a tactic or a strategy with a particular piece or series of pieces that is perhaps you experience it from the other side as a negative play experience, does that factor into your feedback and how you sort of work with the game and discuss things with Corvus?
Yeah, sure, definitely. At least from my perspective, I want to avoid those kind of negative experiences that, for example, GML had in N4. And just as a disclaimer, we joined the testing process only in, I think, April or May this year. So that was after N5 was launched and after Imperial Service was launched. So we had no part in that.
Mm-hmm. I think I joined a little bit before you, but yeah, no say in N5 as it was launched, nor ISS because I think that was before as well. But yeah, the simple answer to that question is yes. Fun matters a lot. Negative play experiences, so-called negative play experiences, matter a lot. If there's something that just feels really frustrating or just seems like it kind of removes options from the game and is quite difficult to play against, then I will comment on that and have a think about it quite carefully. And there are many things in the game that I think are reasonably balanced that aren't that fun. And I have a careful think about them and how they should function and things like that.
That's a really good point. I mean, there's the kind of the bugbears, right? The GMLs of the world that people really viscerally hate and have obviously had bad experiences with. But for every example like that, of which there are actually very few, there are tons of profiles which are fine, that are neither fun to play with or against because they don't really like bring a lot, or they do something which is just sort of moderately good. Like there is an interesting consideration there for the wider community, perhaps around like, okay, if you hate something, that's fine, but maybe reverse the question around and go, okay, but if you look from the thing you hate back into the game and think, well, what of all those things in there do you really care about? Maybe that's perhaps a slightly more healthy way to look at it and a more interesting way to think, okay, well, there's a lot more in this game that we could change instead of just this one thing you hate right now.
Yeah, right. There's when you're looking at a mechanic that you don't like, you can obviously comment on not liking that thing, but you can also comment on all the other stuff that maybe could be made a little bit better to combat that thing, or the other things that you do like and are working. So there are lots of avenues you can go down when you're playtesting. When something comes to our attention that feels powerful or feels maybe unfun, if we're going to use that word, we will play with it a bit and take it into games and say, hey, and I'll say to Panda like, hey, how did it feel playing against that? Was that a fun game? Did it go well? There's something that I've been testing recently that Panda and I thought might be a little bit questionable before we started, and we've now played a couple of games with it, and actually, it's fine. It's kind of okay. So again, it comes back to that thing of like patience and actually getting the reps in before you knee jerk.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Actually, when I first saw that thing, if I probably know what what you're talking about. I was actually slightly horrified, but then when that first reaction uh, went off, and I started like thinking about it more, it seemed more fine. And now after I've seen it in a couple of games that we have played, it's actually totally fine.
Mm, yeah. So I think
But
one of the. Oh, sorry, Panda. Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, then there have been some other instances uh, when I have seen something and I have thought that this might not be great, that this might not be fun for the opponent, and I have also deliberately tested that to see if it's actually as bad as I think, and and sometimes it has turned out to be as bad as I thought, and then I have of course sent my feedback to CB.
And his apologies to me for the game.
Well, that leads into an interesting question. Then we had someone ask, "Do you ever try to break the game?" And that maybe is related to that. If you have something which you feel like is going to be a bit janky and unpleasant, do you lean into that and think, okay, maybe this will be bad, so I'm going to try and make it as bad as possible and see where it can go?
Yeah, sure. Of course, we have limited amount of time to test things. So, like Blessed has mentioned, we usually have time to play one game a week. So we cannot test everything. But if there is something that I significantly uh, think that might break the game or might give a negative play experience, then of course I'm going to test it.
I think it's also worth mentioning, I don't know if we said this in the introduction, but obviously we are part of a playtesting team. And I've come to understand, I think there are multiple playtesting teams. That's speculation, but I believe it's true. So Panda and I obviously do as much as we can in our playtesting, but in terms of trying to break the game and testing for different metas and different matchups, we also kind of have to have faith that the other people are approaching this in the same way that we do. Because as we said, like most people are playing 1 to 2 games a week, maybe even less. So gotta, gotta remember that we are part of a team here. It's not just us, obviously.
Yeah, there are multiple testing pairs. I don't know exactly how many, but we are not the only ones testing.
Oh, and I think I just want to quickly add something on fun. I was having a discussion with this about with Panda the other day, but for me as well, it is also important that every faction or everything I look at, I do want 1 or 2 profiles to be like quite obvious or straightforward in their use. I think it's fine to have really technical profiles, like let's say, for example, I'll just throw out an example of like Fides or Speculos, impersonators. It's okay to have things in the game that are hard to use, but I also think it's really healthy to have things in the game like the Azrael or like, the whatever that's just sort of point and shoot, and it's like quite new player friendly and it makes sense and you don't need to spend years baffling over how to use it. I think that's important for fun and stuff as well.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I haven't thought about that uh, before, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, I suppose as we've both mentioned, like you're playing roughly once a week, testing, and many, if not most, maybe even a vast majority of players play even less than that, perhaps considerably less than that. So yeah, if you're coming into the game and the sort of this almost prosaic, infinity dad, right, who plays a 1 day tournament maybe twice a year, and maybe gets in a handful of games the rest of the time. Uh, he doesn't want to have to like puzzle, as you say, puzzle over how am I going to get value out of V-Day or this speculo or whatever IR or whatever the unit happens to be. You need something to just, as you say, point and shoot and roll some dice and have a good time.
Yeah, exactly. It is good design, in my opinion, to have things that just work.
Cool. Last question for this section, and this may go on along. It perhaps points to some other things, but how often do you go back to older content?
Mm. well, obviously we can't really comment on, the projects and the things that CB asks us to do, but I can say from my own personal perspective, as I said earlier, I do monitor a lot of online conversation. I do think quite deeply about all of the factions in the game. And even if I'm playtesting something new, I will always in my report send in a couple of recommendations about like one or two older units that I think could do with a look at. So whilst the answer might not be constantly, it's always in my mind.
Yeah, I have the same approach.
Cool. All right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Straightforward question then.
Nice and
There
easy.
you
Yeah,
go.
yeah. They don't all have to be long answers. If you have a short
No.
answer, that's also fine. Okay. I'm gonna read out one long question that we've got, and maybe from that we can either get a specific answer, which I feel is perhaps unlikely, or it might
Mhm.
speak to some sort of broader issues. So I will read it verbatim.
Mm.
Why does it seem that vanilla combined army have so few concessions and even have some very unique options in army lists, whereas other armies, such as Ariadna especially, feel very undertuned? An example of vanilla combined army is how many other vanilla factions lose units to their sectorials, Tariq only being available in Rama Task Force, for example. But vanilla combined army get to keep Sheskin and Achilles. Vanilla Combined Army also have the only wildcard in vanilla fire teams, which also just seems odd. What decisions go into this, and when will we see vanilla Combined Army taken down a peg or two, and less attuned armies such as Ariadna and Shaz get attention? I think we can tell from the questioner which faction they play and which faction they face a lot and hate. But I think it's an interesting question, the broader what it's speaking to, which is, how do these sort of things come about, and why are they the way they are? Maybe that's too deep a question, but how would you like to try and answer it?
Why don't you go ahead, Panda, and we can have a chat about it?
Yeah, thanks. That's a difficult question. And it's difficult to answer, and it also involves, of course, stuff that we can't really talk about. But I can say that, of course, like CB makes these decisions, and like these are decisions that have been already made, like when the N5 was launched, and some have been made like before that, and we don't really know that much about the thought process of CB, so we don't know why Vanilla Combined Army is like it is now, and why Vanilla Ariadna or Vanilla Hakislam is like they are. Only thing we can do is, if we notice that some factions seem too strong and some factions are too weak, we can point that out to CB and give them suggestions what could be done to remedy that situation.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out to people that we're not involved in game design, we're involved in game balance, right? So we don't decide like how a faction is designed, what CB, want to release, what they want to do. That we have nothing to do with that. What we just think about is the projects that we're working on and any sort of balance concerns. And it's important to say that a lot of work, because of this thing I've already said about not knee jerking, a lot of this work has to happen post hoc, like after release, because we can play as many games as we play and the testing team can play as many games as they do, but once something gets released, suddenly hundreds or thousands of games are played, and instantly you realize, oh shit, I missed that, I missed this thing, and then you can go back and have a look at it again. So I think that goes some way to answering a bit of the question without giving anything away.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think the question about vanilla combined army is, I mean, any faction really, that's pre-exists N5 is like there's lots of historical contingencies involved in that faction's creation.
Yeah.
Vanilla armies were every possible unit that you could take for the faction, and that sort of complexity and those kind of historical decisions that are sort of piled up from one edition to the next you can't unwind those things all at once, right? You know, it takes time and
It
as you say,
does.
testing and things.
And sometimes
Yeah.
it doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes we are genuinely surprised, and sometimes CB is surprised. I'm not, obviously I can't talk about specific comments that have been made, but there have been times when CB have said, in reality, this is what's happening. We didn't necessarily know beforehand that this is what would happen. So actually, now we need to go back and look at it because, not that it wasn't expected, but it's just interesting to see what happens in the real world. I'm trying to answer the question and be vague.
Sure. Sure. I think there's an interesting thing related to this, which is, your amount of testing that you personally do and that CB can collect in any given amount of time, as you said, pales into insignificance compared to how many games get played probably in the first
probably
2 weeks of a release. So, like, when a player or some voice online says this profile is broken nonsense or this profile is garbage, and why did CB not know this from the start? It's like, well, there's only so much that you can do, and this person has discovered this to them is an
Right.
obvious flaw, and maybe it turns out to be something that a few people notice, and it becomes apparent that it is a problem, but that's only happened because hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games have been played that has
And
revealed
also
that.
bear in mind something else. Panda and I might playtest something and spot something, but the other playtesters might not necessarily spot it. So one of the comments that I see often is like, like if anyone had done any playtesting, it would have been really obvious that this would come about. But we don't all play the same lists. We don't all play the same factions. We don't all play the same missions. So what might be painfully obvious in one list to one playtesting team is not going to be obvious on another list to another playtesting team. So actually, these things do require some time to come out. And in terms of balance, obviously, that has to be done post hoc, right? We need to look at the results and do it post release.
Yeah, there will always be things that are missed in testing, but that's why it's great that this testing exists, so we can also go back to older stuff and do more frequent updates to profiles if something is indeed broken. I also want to go back to the original question. One thing that I like about in Infinity is that the lore is often included in the factions and the way they are designed from gameplay perspective and their profiles. But I can also make things a bit difficult often. Like Vanilla Combined or generally Combined Army in their lore are pretty strong faction. So also on the game table, they should reflect that, but then how to balance that is a difficult question.
Yeah. And also the fact that Vanilla Combined is supposed to have access to a lot of expensive and powerful one-of individual units like Achilles, like whatever else, Sheskin, Norkias, whatever. That's a core design feature of the faction. Now, we might think, okay, 6 months on, actually this is causing some problems. What are we going to do about it? But it's part of the faction, it's part of the law, and we can't just go, oh god, we're going to have to rewrite Combined in a week. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, at least in my comments, I want the game design or my suggestions to reflect the Infinite lore as much as possible.
Yeah. And I remember Panda and I have written reports and we've said, hey, this unit is supposed to do this in the lore, but it doesn't feel like it's doing that. So what can we do to change the profile to reflect the lore? And remember, we're both competitive players. We want strong, compelling, and interesting profiles. But there are ways to do, for example, like assassin type units. There are ways to do defensive type units. There are ways to do bodyguard type units, whatever. So we think about the lore and we try and make sure that the profiles reflect the lore, but are also interesting.
Yeah, and also when I spend time thinking about profiles and how they could be improved, for example, lore is really useful resource to go to get some ideas and how these profiles should
Yeah.
perhaps look like.
Yeah. I think a good example of this is in N4 or in prior editions, Pano has had quite a problem with sort of light or medium infantry that all kind of stepped on each other's toes a little bit. So I'm thinking of like Kamau versus Bagmarie versus like whatever else kind of light infantry that had some mimetism or MSV or whatever. Maybe bolts, whatever. Very similar things. If I were to then be given these and said, hey, we need to work on these, I would look at the lore and say, okay, well, this one's supposed to do this. So let's differentiate it by like doing X, Y, or Z. Like maybe it should be given a terrain skill or a movement skill. This one's supposed to be more defensive. Okay, can we up its armor? Can we give it like, I don't know, a mind layer option, whatever. So if we want to fix some profiles and balance some things, the lore is a really good guide to help us differentiate different units and work from there.
That's really nice to hear. I as a fan of the lore and of the lore being central to the sort of mechanics of the game, it's good to hear that that you also take that seriously. But I think it is important to the identity of the game, right? If you just come from the perspective that, okay, this unit should be good at shooting, this unit should be good at that, this should, in a sort of a generalized box of like this does this role, then you're sort of getting more towards chess, and as in like, I have a piece that goes diagonally. Okay, good. I have a piece that goes straight forward. Okay, good. Like the character of the game is lost then, as if you're working towards that as a goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, just to be clear, I'm not talking about any current playtesting or things. I'm just trying to give some examples from last edition, where we could say, this is how we could differentiate stuff.
Yeah, so we cannot answer why Vanilla Combined Army is so good. But if we think that Vanilla Combined Army is too good, then we can let CB know that's our opinion and try to come up with ways of maybe making it less good and bring that to CB's attention.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. And so when they ignore you and give Vanilla Combined Army AVA 3 avatars or something stupid, then we know it's on them and not on you.
Yeah, I mean, look, and also the thing is, it would be both arrogant and inappropriate to expect CB to do what we want them to do every time, because I get things wrong. I'm sure, Panda would be happy to admit that sometimes he gets things wrong. We're not always right about things, and you've got to bear that in mind.
Yeah, I totally agree. But on the other hand, I have been surprised how often CB really does seem to listen to our feedback.
Yeah, it's actually a really beautiful process. Like, I remember those weeks where Panda and I were sending in like well over 10 pages of documents, and the next week we'd get stuff back, and like a lot of what we'd suggested had been done. They are attentive. CB care, and they are making changes. They're obviously listening.
That's good to hear. I mean, there is also quite a common kind of narrative amongst one or two perhaps disgruntled players who play Ariadne or something like that, that CB don't care, right? That they just want you to do the flavor of the month thing, and they don't like or care about specific factions, or they particularly love a specific faction that they want to be like combined, right? But that I mean, that doesn't really pass the smell test for me personally. It doesn't seem like a sensible or meaningful way for someone to run a business. But your experience also reflects that. Like you're saying that they listen to you, and they presumably then listen to other testers and are triangulating something that makes sense for as many people as possible.
Yeah, and then people are going to come back to that comment. They're going to say, "Well, if that were true, how come they didn't fix, in inverted quotes, fix X, Y, Z 6 months ago?" And again, we need to come back to the fact that we need to work on new material a lot of the time. We're not getting that many games in. We don't have that much time, and I can't spend months on end looking at. I'm just going to pull a random faction out, looking at Kappa Kalki. I'm afraid. I'm sorry, I can't do it because we've got to look at other stuff.
Yeah, and also CB has limited amount of resources. So my feeling is that they really do care about all of their factions, but they cannot fix everything at once. So it will take time.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. There's hopefully you, dear listeners who sent in questions, will have gained, if not exact and direct answers to some of your questions. Hopefully you're getting a shape of what we can and can't talk about, and some of the things that has been asked. Yeah, I have a long list of questions, of which some of which I am skipping over because you either answered them or I am now seeing that you can't possibly answer them. So we'll move on to maybe a little more of a personal tip of your opinions about testing. What so you've been playtesters for less than a year, and you have also suggested, you've also pointed up being experienced players and being able to kind of get a sense of something just from looking at it. But have you found or noticed any kind of telltale signs that something is overperforming or overpowered, that wouldn't otherwise be obvious? Is that something you can discuss?
It's an interesting question. Do you have any thoughts, Panda?
No, not really.
No. I guess the things that we would talk about here would be the things that any competitive player looks for in a unit. So think about like how order efficient it is, how many orders it generates, all that kind of stuff is things that give us an indication of whether it's going to be like really good or not very good. Those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think it's also quite difficult to say whether a profile is like too good just by looking at the profile, because you have to put that profile in a context of its faction and how that profile will be used in actual games. So maybe some profile has excellent stats and excellent weapons, and like on the surface looks overpowered, but then when you put it in a list and try to do some things with the profile in an actual game, you might notice that there are some significant limitations and weaknesses that the profile has.
Yeah. So I think for me, like one of the things that we look for is how does the profile fit into the list? Because something can be really powerful, but if the faction struggles to generate orders, for example, it might actually be far less powerful because you just can't fit it in. Or you can fit it in, but it's going to be like the linchpin, like the only thing in your list that, let's say, is that powerful, for example. So we have to build lists a lot of the time and have a look at them.
Okay. Moving along, we've already talked a little bit about how the length of time you can work on any given project is variable. Is there a period in which, over the time you've been working, where the job gets especially stressful? And are they, CB putting a lot of demands on you? And then conversely, if that is the case, and do you find yourselves getting fatigued, and how do you deal with that?
We can't really give specifics, but when a new project is sort of when it's getting to crunch time with a new project, so we're quite mature into the process, we know that it needs to be kind of released soon. It can get very stressful because we've got a lot of work to do quite quickly. In those cases, sometimes it's helpful if Panda and I split things. So I have some of my favorite factions that I can look at and comment on very confidently, and Panda has some different factions that he can comment on very confidently. So sometimes we'll look at stuff kind of separately and then come back together and compare notes and stuff. So that helps a lot. But yeah, as when a sort of big project like is reaching maturity, it gets really stressful because we've got to start being quite specific and just going through a lot of material, like pages and pages of units, for example.
But personally, I haven't really felt any fatigue, but because in the end, it's like completely up to us how many hours we want to put in. So we do not have any like uh, official or clear responsibility of what we should do. It's completely up to us how long our reports are and how much time we spend, and also like even if we might divide work in a way sometimes that we focus on different factions, we still form our own opinions about those factions. So I might look at some comments that BlessedBe has sent me about a faction that he has looked, and then go through them, agree with some of them, disagree with others.
Like sometimes Panda will send me a message and say, "Hey, like, can you just take a look at this?" And I'll give it, another check, and I'll form my own opinion about it. But there are different things that capture our attention, and that's quite helpful.
Well, I think we've answered almost all of our questions. I think the last question I have on my list here is, and it's one that you feel free to answer in any level of detail that you wish. But what changes to the playtest process would you like to see to make it either A, better for you, or B, better understood by the community?
I think whenever you work on anything like this, just speaking generally in terms of working on any material, you always want more time. Everyone always wants more time in their life to do things. We want to get things right, and we really care about this game. And to do that, often we just feel that more time could be helpful, but I obviously can't give any specifics, and I'm just saying that as someone that wants to do the best job they can. If I get a second look, a third look, a fourth look at something, it can help to make sure that the product is as good as possible when it is released.
How about you, Panda?
Yeah, I would say that in most cases, I think we've had enough time to test things. We've seen things go through multiple iterations, but of course not always. Sometimes there are of course situations that we do not have enough time to test something before they have to be released. Uh, but other than that, I've been generally really happy with the testing process. If I could wish for something more, maybe more context uh, from CB about their thoughts process, about their ideas, why things are designed that way. But of course, I have to keep in mind that uh, CB has limited resources. They cannot spend too much time writing essays to us about how they're designing profiles or factions or rules or whatever.
Yeah, it's useful to have more information, but you know, CB just can't spend all of their time typing essays to us about their thought processes, so it's not always going to be possible, is it? But I will say, Panda and I and the other playtesters, we get sent a lot of material. Anything you can think of about a faction, we could well look at, and so CB are responsive. They get a lot of information. They do listen to us. And I think they do a really good job. And I'd also like people to understand that um, all of this stuff is just tricky, isn't it? Because there's a real balance between going back and looking at old stuff and wanting the game to go forward and look at new stuff. And we don't always know what's next and what CB are thinking. So you just kind of have to be cognizant of that. Just keep it in mind, really.
All right. Well, I think with that, we can wrap this one up. I hope, dear listener, that you have enjoyed this little look behind the curtain for the play testing of Infinity, the game. I know I certainly have. It's been really interesting and insightful, and I think my hope as the sort of interviewer here is that you, as a listener, take away that this process is complex, but most importantly, the people who are behind it do care about what the game is and what your units do, and you might not get exactly what you want, but that's not always a bad thing. We can't always get what we want, but in general, if we look at the overall health of the game, perhaps that's maybe the most important thing to think about. For you two, are there any final thoughts, reflections, things you'd like to add just before we sign off here?
I don't think so. I think I'd like to say I've tried to give general sort of general examples throughout this podcast that aren't specific, that aren't necessarily things that we're working on. I can't comment on any specifics, but I'm just trying to give people a flavor of what it's like to do this kind of work.
Yeah, we unfortunately can't give anything specific about any profiles and so on, but I hope that this has given some useful information for listeners.
Yeah, I mean, if you told us all of the things you're working on, then when they came out, they wouldn't be a surprise now, would they?
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you both for coming on, and thank you, dear listener, for paying attention for all of this time. I hope you've enjoyed it. My name is Diomedes, and this is the Whip 12 podcast.